The rain had been falling since somewhere around Elko, a thin, persistent drizzle that turned the Nevada highway into a black ribbon stitched with headlights, and Rex Dalton had been riding through it for 2 hours without stopping, because stopping felt like admitting something he wasn't ready to admit yet. I was 58 years old, and he had been out of prison for 93 days. Not that he counted, except that he did. Every morning before coffee, before boots, before anything, the number was just there in his head, the way a scar stays on skin long after the wound has closed. 93 days of sleeping in a bed that didn't have a top bunk above it. 93 days of choosing what to eat. 93 days of riding the same roads he had ridden for 30 years before the trial, before the verdict, before the iron door that took 6 years out of the middle of his life and gave him back nothing but a state-issued check for $240 and a garbage bag with his personal effects. I had not done what they said he did. The court had eventually agreed. But courts that admit their mistakes don't hand back 6 years. They don't hand back the funeral of a woman you were in love with, a funeral you watched through a tiny screen in a visitation room while a corrections officer stood 6 feet behind you with his arms crossed. They don't hand back the years your daughter stopped writing letters because she was 17 and her father was in prison and the world told her to be ashamed, and then she was 18 and gone somewhere he hadn't found yet. The courts gave him exoneration papers and a form to fill out if he wanted to pursue civil damages. I hadn't filled it out yet. The sign for Millstone came up out of the dark the way road signs do when you've stopped watching for them, sudden and pale in the headlight wash. Population 1,100. Elevation 4,200. And below that in the hand-lettered edition, someone had bolted to the original sign years ago and never bothered to repaint Millstone Diner open late. Rex pulled off the highway without deciding to. His hands were stiff. His right shoulder had been aching since the Humboldt cut off the old injury that prison's inadequate medical care had turned from a manageable problem into a permanent condition. The rain was cold in a way that crept under leather and settled into joints, and he hadn't eaten since a gas station sandwich outside Winnemucca at 2 in the afternoon. He parked the bike under the diner's overhang, a 1987 Harley Electra Glide with 190,000 miles on it, and the Iron Wolves patch still bolted to the rear fender because nobody had bothered to take it off, and he hadn't decided yet whether to put it back or leave it there as a question. He sat on it for a moment after the engine died, listening to the rain tap on the overhang's tin roof, feeling the silence that always followed an engine's shutdown, the way a room feels after music stops. Then he went inside. The bell above the door gave a short, cheerful ring that sounded wrong for the hour. It was 11:52 at night. The diner smelled of coffee and fry grease, and the particular warmth that old diners accumulate from decades of being the only lit window for miles. The floor was black and white checkered vinyl worn to gray at the counter stools, and the counter itself was pale yellow formica with chrome edging that had turned brassy in the middle where elbows had rested for 30 years. 4 customers occupied the room. A trucker in a yellow rain jacket who had pushed his plate aside and was reading something on his phone. An older couple in the third booth who looked like they were driving somewhere overnight and not particularly enjoying it. And a waitress moving between the counter and the kitchen passed through with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this long enough that the whole thing ran on muscle memory. Rex felt the standard shift in temperature. Not the air temperature, the social one, the way conversations thinned and gazes moved and settled elsewhere. He was used to it. 6 feet 1, 220 pounds gray hair buzzed short on the sides with a streak of iron white through the top beard, trimmed close and shot through with silver. The leather cut was old and dark, and the Iron Wolves patch on the back was the kind of thing people recognized in Nevada, even if they couldn't have told you what it meant exactly. The sum of him was the sum that made rooms decide he was trouble before he opened his mouth. He walked to the counter and lowered himself onto the stool at the far end, away from the other customers, and waited. The waitress came over. She was mid-50s, solid brown hair pulled back, with the kind of face that had decided long ago to be honest about being tired. Her name tag read Donna. She looked at him the way experienced diner workers look at late-night truckers and bikers with professional neutrality. That wasn't quite warmth and wasn't quite suspicion. "Coffee," she said. "Please. Anything to eat. Whatever's still hot." She poured the coffee without asking how he took it, which meant she was good at her job, and went toward the kitchen. Rex wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat move into his knuckles, staring at nothing in particular, just the rain against the window and the reflections of the neon sign in it, red and white Millstone Diner, blurring in the water. I was almost all the way relaxed, or as close to it as he got anymore, when he noticed the booth at the end of the row. Hadn't looked when he came in. He'd taken the direct line to the counter without scanning the room the way he used to back when scanning rooms was a survival skill. He was trying to stop doing things like that, trying to stop living inside the habits that 6 years of incarceration had pressed into him like a mold. But he looked now. The last booth by the window was occupied by a child. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, sitting with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up on the seat, wearing a red and white striped raincoat that had gotten wet enough to drip. Her hair was brown and tangled from the rain, hanging loose around a small, pale face. She had a backpack in her lap, olive green, with a yellow lightning bolt patch on the front pocket, and both arms were wrapped around it the way a person holds something irreplaceable. She was alone. Rex looked toward the kitchen where the sounds of something on a grill were audible. He looked toward Donna, who had disappeared through the pass-through to pick up an order for the trucker. He looked at the couple in the third booth, both of whom were looking at their phones. The girl was watching the parking lot through the window, not the way kids watch things out of boredom or curiosity. The way people watch things when they are waiting to find out if the thing they are afraid of is going to happen. Rex knew that kind of watching. He had done it himself in different rooms and different circumstances, and he recognized it the way you recognize a word in a foreign language you learned under duress. He picked up his coffee and moved to the last booth. I didn't sit across from her immediately. He stood at the end of the table, leaving the aisle open, leaving her every exit available, and he spoke at a volume that would not carry to the other customers. "You mind if I sit here?" The girl looked at him, not with the shock or fear he expected. She looked at him the same way she had been looking at the parking lot, with the careful, focused attention of someone who was deciding something important very quickly. "You're not going to make me leave," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," he said. She studied him for another second. Then she shifted her feet to one side, making room on the seat across from her, as if she were making space for someone much smaller. Rex sat down. He set the coffee mug on the table, placed both hands on either side of it where she could see them, and waited. His hands were large and scarred across the knuckles, the skin leathered from decades of weather and mechanical work, with a faded blue-black tattoo visible below the right cuff. An eagle with its wings spread in the particular style that marks certain parts of his past without needing explanation. He didn't hide them. Hiding hands made people more nervous, not less. "My name's Rex," he said. "Most people call me Ironside." The girl looked at the tattoo, then at his face. "Why Ironside?" "Came off a bike at 60 miles an hour when I was 26. Busted 4 ribs in my collarbone. Doctor said I had the sides of an iron frame." He paused. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Not with suspicion, but with the consideration of someone who had been taught that names were a kind of currency and you spent them carefully. "Lily," she said. "Lily." He said it back to her the same way, just confirming he'd heard it. "How old are you?" 8, 8.5. 8.5 is important. My mom always said the half matters." Past tense, said. Rex noted it and said nothing. Donna came back with his food, a plate of eggs and toast and hash browns that had been sitting under a heat lamp, and she paused when she saw him in the booth. Not with alarm exactly, with the recalculation of someone whose understanding of the room had just shifted. "She was here when you came in," Donna said quietly enough that it was almost a private question. "I think she's been here a while," Rex said. Donna looked at Lily, who had turned her face back toward the window, and her expression changed in a way that had nothing to do with waitressing. "Honey, can I get you something hot chocolate? We've got those little marshmallows." Lily turned from the window. "Is there anything without caffeine?" "Hot chocolate doesn't have caffeine, sweetheart." "Okay." Lily looked back at the window. "Please." Donna went to get it. Rex cut into the eggs without hurrying. The rain pressed against the glass in waves, and the parking lot outside was mostly empty. A few trucks near the highway, facing side. A red pickup that had been there when Rex arrived, in the blue-white glow of the gas station across the road. I was halfway through the eggs when Lily spoke again. "He's going to come back," she said. Not to him exactly, more like saying a thing aloud to see how it sounded in the real world outside her head. "Who is Rex?" said. She looked at him, then she looked at the window. "My dad, except he's not my dad. My mom married him after my real dad left, but she died, so now he says he's my guardian." Rex set down his fork. He kept his voice even. "What's his name?" "Conrad." She said it the way people say the name of a thing they are afraid of, quickly, like the name itself might do something. "Conrad Hargrove." The name meant nothing to Rex. He filed it anyway. Is Conrad a bad man? Rex asked. Lily was quiet for long enough that the question seemed to change shape in the air between them. Then she said, he doesn't do things where people can see. Rex felt those 6 words settle into his chest like stones dropped in water. He had heard variations of them before. In prison, where men who had done terrible things to people smaller than themselves always described it the same way, always calibrated to the absence of witnesses. He had heard it in the language of the courts, in the careful legal framing of what could and could not be proven. He had heard it in the silence of his own daughter's letters toward the end, when she stopped describing anything and only sent short notes saying she was fine. I didn't do things where people could see. Where did Conrad go? Rex asked. Inside the gas station. He said he needed to use the bathroom and he'd be 5 minutes. That was... She glanced toward the clock above the pass-through, a round institutional clock with a cracked lens. 22 minutes ago. And you came in here. There was a sign in the window. She pointed. Rex turned. In the lower corner of the diner's front window, a laminated card read, if you feel unsafe, you can ask for help here. It was new-looking. The kind of thing put up by someone who had decided it mattered. My mom told me that, Lily said. She said if I was ever scared, I should find somewhere with lights and people and look for a sign like that. Donna came back with the hot chocolate, setting it carefully in the center of the table, not directly in front of Lily, and not directly in front of Rex, just available. And she lowered herself onto the seat edge of the empty adjacent booth and said quietly, is there someone we should call, someone safe? Lily pulled the backpack a little tighter against her chest. My Aunt Ruth, but I don't have my phone. She looked at Rex. Conrad took it. He said I was using too much data. Do you know your aunt's number? Lily nodded. Then her eyes moved to the parking lot again, and something in her body shifted the way a compass needle shifts fast and involuntary. Rex turned without moving, obviously. A black SUV was rolling slowly into the parking lot. Not a gas station customer angling for a pump. Rolling with the particular slowness of someone who was looking for something. It stopped at the far edge of the lot, hood facing the diner's front windows, engine running. Lily's breathing changed. Rex could hear it from 3 feet away. Not panic, not crying, just the deliberate, controlled breathing of a child who had learned to minimize herself in a crisis. That's him, she said very quietly. Rex looked at her. Lily, I'm going to ask you something and you can answer however you want with words, or just a nod, doesn't matter. Do you want to go back to Conrad tonight? She shook her head. Once, small, absolute. Rex looked at Donna. You got a phone back there with an outside line. Counter has one. Call the county sheriff. Not because she's missing, she's not missing. Because there's a child here who doesn't feel safe leaving with the adult who has custody, and we need someone with a badge to sort that out correctly. He paused. Can you do that? Donna stood, not hurrying, not showing alarm on her face, the same way a person moves when they are doing something important and trying not to make it obvious. I'll call right now. She moved toward the counter. The trucker in the yellow rain jacket glanced over, caught something in the room's temperature, and turned his full attention toward his coffee with the studied neutrality of a man who has decided he is going to stay put regardless of what happens next. The older couple in the third booth looked up. The woman's eyes moved from Lily to Rex to the black SUV outside and then down to the table, and she did not look back up, but her hand moved to cover her husband's, and she said something to him in a low voice. Rex turned back to Lily. She was looking at him with that same careful weighing attention. You're not afraid of me, he said. It wasn't exactly a question. My mom wasn't afraid of people who look like you, Lily said. She said the ones to be afraid of are the ones with clean shoes. Rex looked down at his own boots. They were old and waterproof and had 500 miles of Nevada highway on them. He looked at Lily. Your mom sounds like she was smart. She was, Lily said. Then she's gone. She died in January. They said it was a car accident. The pause that followed that sentence was the length of something unsaid. Rex let it sit. He didn't push. He had learned in the years before prison and the years after that truth came out of people. The way water comes from rock slowly through pressure and time, and you couldn't force it faster without losing most of it. The black SUV in the parking lot hadn't moved. Its engine was still running. The headlights were off, but the parking lights glowed orange in the rain. How long have you been with Conrad? Rex asked. Since February. 3 weeks after, she stopped. Started again, after the funeral. Where were you before your mom? With mom, always. She looked at the backpack in her lap. Conrad said she wanted him to take care of me, but she wrote me a letter. She said if something happened to her, I should go to Aunt Ruth. Where's the letter? Lily unzipped the top of the backpack and reached inside with one hand. She came out with a folded piece of paper creased multiple times in the way things get when they've been carried for months, the folds worn soft and starting to separate. She put it on the table and pushed it halfway toward Rex. He read it without picking it up. It was handwritten on plain paper blue ink, a woman's script that started neat and became more urgent as it continued. The first line read, "My darling Lily, if you are reading this, then something happened that I tried to prevent." At the bottom, a name and phone number, Ruth Briggs. And below that, in larger letters underlined, "Do not stay with Conrad. Find a way to Ruth. She knows what to do." Rex looked at the date in the upper corner of the letter. November 14th, 10 weeks before the car accident. He read that again. He let it mean what it meant. "Does Conrad know you have this?" Rex asked. "No, I hid it in the pocket with the broken zipper." She pointed to a side pocket on the backpack where the zipper pull had snapped off and been replaced with a piece of shoelace. Rex nodded once. "Okay, good. You're going to keep it right there." He looked toward the counter. Donna had the phone pressed to her ear. Her back turned, speaking in the low, steady register of someone giving a dispatcher information without editorializing. The bell above the diner door gave its cheerful ring. Rex and Lily looked at the same time. But it wasn't Conrad. The man who came through the door was wearing an Iron Wolf's cut that Rex recognized even before he recognized the face. Slade Mercer, 44 years old, heavy in the shoulders with a red beard going gray at the chin, the kind of man who looked like trouble from a distance and was significantly more complicated up close. He was shaking rain off his jacket and scanning the diner with the automatic alertness that long-term MC membership tended to install permanently. His eyes found Rex. Something in his face changed in a way that a stranger wouldn't have caught. Relief and caution together, the specific expression of someone who had been looking for a thing and was still not entirely sure what the right response was to finding it. Rex raised one hand from the table. Not a wave, just visible. Slade came over. He looked at Lily, who was looking at his Iron Wolf's patch with an expression Rex couldn't immediately read. Then Slade looked at Rex and pulled out the bench of the neighboring booth and sat down backward across it, forearms on the top edge, keeping himself close enough to hear, but far enough that he wasn't crowding the child. 87 miles, Slade said to Rex. "I wasn't aware you were tracking me." "I wasn't. Diesel ran into you in Carlin and called it in. 6 of us have been running parallel on different roads since the Nevada border." He paused. "Nobody was tracking you, Rex. We were just in the area." Rex felt the old complex thing that the Iron Wolves had always given him move through his chest, the mixture of gratitude and resistance that came from belonging to something you didn't entirely know how to separate yourself from, even when you needed the distance. He looked at Lily. "This is Slade. He's like me. He's safe." Lily looked at Slade's patch, then at his face. "You know him?" 22 years, Slade said. "He pulled me out of a drainage ditch in Lander County when I was 20 and doesn't let me forget it." Lily looked at Rex. "Is that true?" "Mostly," Rex said. Something in Lily's shoulders released a degree. "Not all the way, but a degree." She looked back at the window where the black SUV still sat at the edge of the lot, with its parking lights glowing. "That's him," she told Slade the way she had told Rex, with the calm flatness of someone who has been afraid for so long they have started to confuse fear with information. Slade looked at the SUV and then at Rex. Rex gave a single small motion with his head toward Donna at the counter. Slade nodded. Donna came back from the phone, pulling her apron straight, and spoke quietly to Rex. "Sheriff's coming. Deputy's 15 minutes out. Frank Holden himself is maybe 30. "Good." Rex looked at the hot chocolate in front of Lily, which she had barely touched. "Drink that. It's going to be a while before anything simple happens." Lily wrapped both hands around the mug. "What if Conrad has better lawyers than the sheriff?" Rex thought about that for a second. The sheriff doesn't need to beat Conrad's lawyers tonight. He just needs to slow everything down long enough for the truth to have time to show up. She looked at him with that particular 8-year-old seriousness that was more precise than most adults managed. "How do you know that works?" "I don't always," Rex said honestly, "but I know that tonight in this diner there are 3 adults who are not going to let anyone take you out that door until a badge comes through it first." Lily looked at him, then at Slade, then at Donna, who had come around the counter and was standing near the end of the booth row with her arms crossed and her chin up, watching the black SUV with an expression that had nothing professional about it. Okay, Lily said. She picked up the hot chocolate. Outside, the parking lot sat quiet in the rain, and the black SUV's orange parking lights glowed like something patient and predatory waiting for its moment. The moment never came because it had miscalculated the room. Rex sat still with his hands on the table, watching the rain, listening for the sound of a door opening, thinking about a letter written in November by a woman who had known what was coming and had loved her daughter carefully enough to leave her a way out. I thought about another letter, one his daughter had written him in year 3 of his incarceration. 4 pages that started with anger and ended with something quieter. More damage the language of a person recalibrating their relationship to a parent they had decided was gone. He had read it so many times the paper had gone soft along the folds. He hadn't answered it, not because he had nothing to say, because he didn't know how to say it from inside a cage without it sounding like an excuse. I was going to answer it. He had been meaning to for 93 days. He looked at Lily, who was watching the parking lot over the rim of her mug with the vigilance of a small animal in open terrain. A mother who saw what was coming had spent her last months making sure her daughter had a way to survive it. Rex thought about what it would have meant to Lily's mother to know that when the moment came, her daughter had found the right room and the right people in it. I thought it would have meant everything. He drank his coffee. He didn't look away from the window. He stayed. The clock above the pass-through read 12:11. The rain kept falling, and the black SUV in the parking lot stayed where it was, as if whatever was inside it was still deciding what kind of man it was dealing with and wasn't quite sure yet what the answer was. The clock above the pass-through ticked forward, and Rex watched it with the kind of attention a man develops when time has been taken from him and he has learned to take it back in small increments. 12:17. The rain outside had settled into a rhythm that was almost comfortable, a steady percussion on the overhang roof that made the diner feel insulated from the highway, from the county, from the broader world that was still making up its mind about what kind of night this was going to be. Lily had finished her hot chocolate and was holding the empty mug the way children hold things when their hands need something to do. She was not looking at the window anymore. The black SUV had not moved, but she had made some internal adjustment to its presence, reclassified it from imminent threat to known quantity, which Rex recognized as a form of courage that most adults didn't give children credit for. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah, when you were in prison." She said it the same way she had said Conrad's name, direct and without flinching, as if the bluntness of a thing made it less frightening. "Were you scared?" Rex thought about the question with the respect it deserved. Children asked the questions adults had learned to not ask, which was why children sometimes got closer to the truth faster. Sometimes, he said, in the beginning, yes. What made it better? I thought about that. About the specific progression of fear in a place designed to maintain it. About how fear without an exit becomes something else, eventually not courage exactly, but a kind of radical acceptance that is its own form of navigation. Work, he said. There were programs. I learned electrical. Spent 2 years helping maintain the facility systems. He paused. And letters for a while. My daughter wrote to me, until she didn't. He looked at his coffee. When the letters stopped, I learned that too. How to be in a room where what you were waiting for wasn't coming. Lily looked at him. That sounds lonely. It was. Do you think she'll come back? Your daughter. Rex thought about the letter he had been meaning to write for 93 days. The letter that had been composing itself in the back of his mind, like a slow fire that wasn't going out no matter how many times he tried to pretend it wasn't burning. I hope so, he said. I'm going to give her the chance to decide. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, my mom said hope is not the same as waiting. She said you have to do the thing that makes the hope possible and then let the other person choose. Rex felt those words move through him with the particular weight of things said by people who had already died and were speaking through their children. Your mom was a smart woman, he said. I know, Lily said. And then more quietly, I miss her a lot. Rex said nothing. Some things didn't need a response. Some things needed only the presence of another person who was willing to remain in the room with the weight of them. Outside, a semi-truck passed on the highway, its running lights amber in the rain. The sound of it, like weather, like something enormous moving through the dark with a destination it was certain of. Rex watched it go. I thought about Carla Vance and the summer she had passed through the Iron Wolves orbit 12 years ago. He had been 46 and already carrying the accumulated weight of a life lived sideways to the law. Not criminal exactly, but adjacent to it in the way that certain kinds of freedom required. He had been in the middle of a long argument with himself about who he was and who he was going to be, an argument he hadn't fully resolved even now, and she had been one of several people that summer who had contributed to his understanding of it without knowing they were doing so. She had been intelligent in the specific way of someone who had taught themselves to be. Not school educated so much as experience educated, the kind of knowledge that came from paying close attention to the world over many years and drawing accurate conclusions from it. She had watched the Iron Wolves with the same methodical interest she brought to everything else, noting how they worked and why and what it cost them, and she had not romanticized it. She had simply observed. And apparently she had observed him. He wondered what she had seen. He wondered whether the thing she had seen was the same thing that had survived 6 years of incarceration and 93 days of figuring out what he was now, or whether the exoneration had given back something he hadn't known prison had taken. I thought it was probably the former. The thing Carla Vance had observed and trusted was not something that could be taken by a court. It was something that lived in the particular way a person conducted themselves in rooms where conduct was tested without warning. Tonight, for example. He looked at Lily. She had leaned her head back slightly against the booth cushion. Not asleep, but resting, her eyes half closed, the backpack still in her lap, the stuffed rabbit she'd retrieved from inside it tucked under one arm. She was exhausted in the deep way of someone who had been running on adrenaline for hours and was now feeling the weight of its absence. You should close your eyes for a while, Rex said. I'm not tired. Okay. A pause. Then her eyes closed the rest of the way. Rex sat across from her and watched the parking lot and listened to the rain and thought about the shape of the night. Donna was at the counter. Slade was outside on the phone. The 4 Iron Wolves who had come in were distributed around the room with the patient stillness of men who had learned to wait in rooms. The trucker in the yellow rain jacket had ordered a second coffee and pulled out a paperback from somewhere, which meant he had decided this was going to take a while, and he was fine with that. The older couple had left about 20 minutes ago, quiet and without making anything of it. Rex didn't hold it against them. People made their own calculations about what they were willing to be part of, and not all of them arrived at the same place. What mattered was the ones who stayed. I thought about that, about the specific value of people who stayed, about how the calculation to remain in a room where something difficult was happening was not as simple as it looked from the outside. You stayed because you had decided the cost of leaving was higher than the cost of remaining. You stayed because the child in the last booth had asked for protection, and you were the person she had asked. You stayed because the world had a way of deciding who you were in moments like this, and you had a say in that decision if you were willing to pay the price of exercising it. He had been given a different kind of decision once years ago in a courtroom in Reno. He had been given the opportunity to accept a plea deal that would have meant 18 months instead of the 10-year sentence the prosecution was seeking. He had turned it down because 18 months for something he hadn't done was still a lie, and he was not willing to let the lie be written into the official record of his life. It had cost him. I was still deciding whether it had been worth it. On the days when his daughter's silence was heavier than others, it did not feel worth it. On the days when he was in the shop and the work was good, and the Nevada morning was clean through the bay door, it felt closer to worth it. Tonight, sitting in the last booth of Millstone Diner, with a sleeping child across the table from him and the truth accumulating in the official record, the way he had always believed it would eventually accumulate, it felt like something he would do again. The clock read 12:34. He looked at Lily's sleeping face. He thought about his daughter's face at 8 years old, 17 years ago, when she had still drawn pictures of him and believed that the world was arranged in a way that kept fathers near their children. He had not kept himself near. That was the truth he carried that had nothing to do with the false accusation. The truth that lived underneath it and would remain after the exoneration papers had long since turned yellow in a filing cabinet somewhere. He had been a man who chose other things over proximity, who had believed that the life he was living was compatible with being a father in any real sense, and who had discovered too late that it wasn't. The years in prison had given him a great deal of time to understand this. He had arrived at the understanding not through drama or revelation, but through the slow accretion of accurate self-assessment, the way you arrive at a destination by walking, rather than by being transported one step at a time, each one showing you more clearly where you actually were. I was not the same man who had walked into that courtroom. I was not sure yet whether he was the man he wanted to be instead. But he was in this diner at this table watching over this child, and the door was open, and that was more than he had had a year ago. Lily stirred in her sleep, pulled the stuffed rabbit closer, and settled back into stillness. Rex stayed where he was. Outside, the black SUV's door remained closed. The parking lights had gone off entirely now, and in the dark, it was just a shape, an object, a problem that had already been named and documented, and was in the process of being handled by people whose job was to handle exactly this kind of problem. The machinery of the right outcome was in motion. He had started it by sitting down. I thought there were worse things to have done with a Thursday night in eastern Nevada than sit down. In the kitchen, someone turned off one of the overhead lights, which made the diner feel smaller and warmer, and more like a place where people were going to remain until morning if they had to. Slade had shifted his position, so his body naturally occupied the middle of the aisle between the booth row and the front door without it looking deliberate. Donna had returned behind the counter and was moving with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had decided to keep busy because keeping busy was how she stayed calm. And Lily Briggs sat in the last booth with both hands around a mug of hot chocolate, her backpack in her lap, her mother's letter tucked in the broken zipper pocket, and watched the parking lot with the patience of a child who had learned that patience was a form of survival. Rex had been silent for 3 minutes when Lily said without looking away from the window, "You have a daughter." It wasn't a question. He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "The way you look at me sometimes. Like you're thinking about someone else." Rex was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I do." "Is she okay?" "I don't know," he said. And then because Lily had given him honesty and she deserved the same, "I lost track of her for a while. I'm trying to find her again." Lily nodded as if this were the kind of information she knew how to handle. "My mom lost track of her sister for a while too, but they found each other again." "Your Aunt Ruth?" "Yeah." She looked at him. "Mom said the people who love you always leave a door somewhere. You just have to look for it." Rex said nothing, but he felt something in his chest that was unfamiliar enough that he didn't have a word for it immediately. Something like the sensation of a window opening in a room that had been sealed for a long time. Outside, the black SUV's parking lights went out. In the sudden darkness, it was hard to see the vehicle at all, just a shape among shapes at the edge of the lot. Then the driver's door opened, and Rex Dalton set down his coffee cup, straightened his spine, and prepared himself for what came through the diner door. Conrad Hargrove did not look like the kind of man people warned their children about. That was the first thing Rex noticed. And it was the thing that made the air in the diner feel immediately colder despite the fact that nothing visibly threatening had happened yet. I was maybe 45, lean and well-dressed in the particular way that said money spent on clothes as a form of argument. Dark jacket collar, open hair combed flat despite the rain, the kind of tan that came from careful maintenance rather than outdoor work. He moved through the door the way certain kinds of men move through public spaces, as if the room had been arranged for his convenience, and he was simply confirming it was all where it should be. His eyes found Lily in under 2 seconds. He smiled, warmly, the way a worried parent would smile at a recovered child. "There you are," he said, and his voice was calibrated to carry just far enough to be audible to the other customers. Not shouting, not aggressive, just the right volume for a relieved father in a public space. "You had me worried, sweetheart." Lily did not move. Her hands were around the mug. Her eyes went flat in a way Rex had seen before in people who had learned to go somewhere internal when the external world became something to manage rather than experience. Conrad crossed the diner at the measured pace of someone demonstrating patience. He stopped 6 feet from the booth. His eyes moved across Rex's face down to the Iron Wolves patch across to Slade, and then back with the smooth comprehension of a man filing information quickly. "I appreciate you keeping an eye on her," Conrad said to Rex. "She gets disoriented sometimes, since her mother." He let that land. The way explanations land when they're designed to preempt other explanations. "She can be quite convincing when she's in one of her episodes." Rex said nothing. Conrad turned to Lily, and something in the space between them changed. Not visibly, not in any way that would have shown on camera or registered to a casual observer. But Rex felt it the way you feel a shift in pressure before weather changes something that moved in one direction only. "Let's get your things, sweetheart. It's late." "The sheriff is on the way," Rex said. Conrad turned back to him. The warmth in his face didn't disappear. It recalibrated. "Excuse me," Donna called, about 15 minutes out, maybe less. Something moved behind Conrad's eyes. Brief, controlled, quickly covered. He looked toward the counter where Donna stood with her arms folded, and then back to Rex, and his expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile anymore, but was using the same muscles. That isn't necessary, he said. His voice was still calibrated, still controlled, but with a new element, the gentle authority of someone explaining things to a person who has misunderstood. I have legal guardianship. This is a family matter. He reached inside his jacket and produced a folded document. He opened it and held it toward Rex without offering it. Everything is in order. Rex looked at the paper. He didn't reach for it. I'm sure it is. Then you understand that whatever this child has told you, Conrad glanced at Lily with exactly the right amount of tender exhaustion, has to be understood in context. What context is that? Rex asked. She lost her mother in January. She's been struggling. She attaches to strangers. She tells stories. Conrad's voice had the practiced fluency of someone who had delivered this explanation multiple times to multiple people. The therapist we've been seeing says it's a grief response. She creates scenarios where someone protects her. Lily was looking at the table. Her fingers were white around the mug. Rex looked at her. Lily, he said, you don't have to look at him. You don't have to answer anything in front of him. You can just sit right there. Conrad's expression shifted again, the warmth dropping a degree. You're coaching her. I'm telling her she has options, Rex said. That's different. Conrad looked at him with the steady appraisal of a man recalculating his position. His eyes went to the Iron Wolves patch again, then to Slade, then back to Rex, and something in his face settled into a new configuration. Still controlled, still polished, but with something harder showing through at the edges. I don't know who you are, Conrad said, but a recently released felon. He paused, letting that word do its work. Interfering in a custody matter is not a situation that ends well for anyone. The room went very quiet. Donna's breath was audible from the counter. The trucker had turned his stool slightly without making it obvious. Slade's hands had gone still on the top of the booth back. Rex looked at Conrad for a long moment. He looked at the way Conrad was standing, the slight lean forward, the deliberate space he was taking up, the way his voice had shifted from warm to surgical, the moment his usual tools hadn't worked. He had known men like this. Not many, but enough. Men who were dangerous, not because they were violent, but because they understood exactly how to use the law, the language of concern, the architecture of credibility, as weapons more precise than anything physical. How do you know I was recently released? Rex asked. A beat, the first genuine one since Conrad had come through the door. Pardon, I didn't tell you that. Lily didn't tell you that. How do you know I was recently released? Conrad recovered quickly. It's visible. The haircut, the way you ran the plate on the bike in the parking lot, Rex said, while you were sitting in the SUV. Conrad said nothing. Rex let that sit. Then he said, that means you had a name inside 5 minutes of parking, and you knew that name before you walked in here. He kept his voice level, which means this isn't the first time you've encountered it. Donna was looking at Rex with an expression he couldn't read. Slade had straightened very slightly. Conrad smoothed his jacket. I'm a thorough man. That's not a crime. No, Rex said. It's not. He looked at Conrad and something old and specific moved in his chest, the particular recognition of a man who had sat across tables from people who were very good at lying and had learned to read the small failures in their performance. But it makes me wonder what else you looked up. Before Conrad could answer, the bell above the door rang again. 2 men in Iron Wolf's cuts came through. Behind them, 2 more. They moved to various points around the diner's perimeter with the unhurried casualness of people finding somewhere to sit, which they were not doing at all. One of them, a compact man in his late 40s named Beckett, went directly to the counter stool nearest the door and settled onto it like he had been doing it for years. Conrad looked at them, then at Slade, then at Rex. You called them, he said. Noti, Slade said from the neighboring booth, his voice easy and flat. We were in the area. Conrad looked at the room. 6 Iron Wolves, 1 diner waitress with her arms crossed, 1 trucker who hadn't moved, an older couple who were both watching openly now, and Rex Dalton sitting in the last booth with a little girl who was still staring at the table. I made the calculation that men like him always made. I'll wait for the sheriff, he said. That's a good idea, Rex said. Conrad took a seat in the front booth nearest the window alone and folded his hands on the table and looked out at the rain with the composed patience of a man who had contingencies. Rex looked at Lily. She had raised her eyes from the table. She was looking at the 4 Iron Wolves who had arranged themselves around the room, and her expression was the specific expression of a child processing something that didn't fit the map they'd been given of the world. Are they all like you? She asked quietly. Most of them, Rex said. My mom had a tattoo, Lily said. Here. She touched her left forearm. It was an eagle. She said she got it a long time ago when she knew some people. She didn't talk about it. Rex looked at her arm, then at her face. Something moved at the back of his mind, the faint beginning of a shape he couldn't see clearly yet. What was your mom's name? He asked. Lily looked at him. Carla. Carla Briggs. Then her name before she married my dad was Carla Vance. Rex stopped. He set down his coffee cup carefully because his hands had done something involuntary and he didn't want to make it visible. He looked at Lily with the careful stillness of a man managing a reaction that was happening faster than his control over it. Carla Vance, I knew that name. Not well, not closely. But he knew it the way you know the name of someone who existed at the edge of a world you once occupied, someone who had passed through the Iron Wolves territory about 12 years ago. A woman traveling, staying a few months quiet and self-contained and purposeful in the way of someone who was leaving something behind and not looking back at it. He had known her face. He had known she was smart and careful and had a way of watching rooms that reminded him of himself. I had not known she had a daughter. He had not known she had died in January. He had not known that the man in the front booth, the smooth man in the good jacket, had filed the paperwork to make himself her daughter's guardian 3 weeks after her funeral. He looked at Lily, 8 years old, brown hair, her mother's eyes now that he saw it. Lily, he said carefully, did your mom ever say anything about people she used to know before she was in Nevada? Lily tilted her head. She said she had good people once. She said if she ever needed help and she couldn't get it herself, she would find a way to send me to someone who had the same tattoo as her. Rex breathed slowly. She said I'd know the right person because they'd listen before they talked, Lily continued. And they'd ask if I was safe before they asked what happened. Rex was quiet for a moment. Did I do that? Lily looked at him with that careful 8-year-old precision. Yes, she said, you did. Outside, the rain was still falling. In the front booth, Conrad Hargrove sat with his hands folded and his eyes on the window, waiting for the sheriff, with the confidence of a man who believed in his own papers. At the last booth, Rex Dalton sat across from a little girl who had been left a map to him by a woman who had known 10 weeks before she died that he was the kind of person her daughter could trust. I thought about Carla Vance traveling through a Nevada summer 12 years ago with that particular watchfulness she'd carried. He thought about what it meant that she had remembered. I thought about his daughter somewhere out there in the country who he hadn't been able to protect from the years he'd spent in a cell for something he hadn't done. I thought about doors. I thought about what Lily had said. The people who love you always leave a door somewhere. The clock above the pass-through read 12:31. Outside in the rain, a distant set of headlights appeared on the highway, moving with the purposeful speed of official travel. The sheriff was coming. Rex straightened in his seat and looked at the letter in Lily's backpack pocket and at the girl who had carried it across Nevada in a broken zippered pocket, because her mother had loved her carefully enough to know exactly what she might need. I was going to make sure the truth had enough time to show up, whatever Conrad Hargrove had in that front booth. Whatever clean documents and prepared explanations and legal machinery he had built around himself. Rex had been in a room before with a man who had everything arranged in his favor and still lost because the one thing you couldn't arrange was a child who looked at a room full of strangers and chose correctly. Lily had chosen correctly. I was going to make sure that counted. Frank Holden arrived at 12:44 in a county cruiser with the lights off, which Rex appreciated. Men who came in with sirens were usually more interested in the performance of authority than the exercise of it. Holden had turned them off 2 blocks out, and he came through the diner door with his hat on and his hands visible, and the practiced calm of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that the first 2 minutes determined everything. I was 52. Rex estimated, compact and weathered, with the quiet eyes of a man who had long since stopped being surprised by people and was now simply interested in understanding them. He scanned the room in the way Rex recognized, not from threat assessment, but from story construction, absorbing the positions of everyone present and assembling the narrative they created. His gaze moved from Conrad in the front booth to Rex at the back, to Lily, to the Iron Wolves placed around the perimeter, to Donna behind the counter. It didn't linger anywhere, just accumulated. Then he walked to the counter. Donna, he said. Frank. She had the phone log already written out on an order pad, times and descriptions, the way someone writes things when they know they'll need to explain them. She pushed it across the counter. He read it without picking it up. Then he walked to the front booth. Conrad rose halfway, extending his hand, establishing the register of a professional encounter. Sheriff, I'm Conrad Hargrove. There's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Hargrove. Holden shook the hand once formally without warmth or hostility. I'm going to ask you to sit back down. while I speak with everyone, and then we'll get to you. Conrad sat, not happily, but he sat. Holden came down the row to the last booth. He stopped at a respectful distance from Lily, which meant he was good at this, or had been trained recently on how to do it. And he said, "Hi there, I'm Sheriff Holden. You don't have to stand up or move or do anything different than what you're doing. I just want to make sure I understand what's going on tonight, okay?" Lily looked at him. She looked at Rex. Rex gave her nothing directive, just steady eye contact, letting her read her own answer in the fact that he wasn't trying to write one for her. "Okay," Lily said. Holden looked at Rex. They regarded each other for a moment with the mutual assessment of two men who had encountered the machinery of law and justice from different sides and had both come away changed by it. "Your name," Holden said. "Rex Dalton." He paused because Holden would run it anyway. "Iron Wolves MC, recently released from Northern Nevada Correctional. Exonerated on appeal, not paroled." Something in Holden's expression registered that last distinction. The difference mattered. Parole meant supervised. Exoneration meant the state had admitted it was wrong. "All right," Holden said. "Tell me what happened from the beginning." Rex told him, clearly without embellishment, without commentary on Conrad, just the sequence of events as they had occurred. He told it the way he had learned to tell things after 6 years in a place where the precise shape of what you said could determine what happened to you. He noted times. He noted what Lily had said and what she hadn't said, and which things she had volunteered and which things she had answered when asked. He noted the letter in the backpack. He noted what Lily had told him about her mother. He did not mention Carla Vance's connection to the Iron Wolves. Not because he was hiding it, but because it was a thread that needed to be pulled carefully in the right direction by the right hands, and this was not the moment. Holden listened. He took notes in a small pad with a short pencil, the old-fashioned kind that suggested a man who didn't trust batteries. When Rex finished, Holden looked at Lily. "Lily," he said, "is there anything Mr. Dalton said that isn't right?" Lily shook her head. "Is there anything he left out that you want me to know?" She thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she reached into the broken zipper pocket and pulled out the folded letter and put it on the table. Holden looked at it. He put on gloves before touching it, which meant he understood immediately what it might be, and he read it with his face arranged into professional neutrality, which he mostly managed except for the small tightening around his eyes on the second paragraph. He folded it carefully and placed it on the table. "Mr. Hargrove," he called toward the front, "I'm going to need to speak with you outside." Conrad stood with the composure of a man who had been waiting for exactly this and had prepared for it. He smoothed his jacket. He gave the room a final look, the room that had organized itself around a child rather than around him, and walked toward the door with the measured pace of a man who had not yet lost and intended to make that point. He paused beside Rex's booth. "This isn't over," he said quietly, and the warmth in his voice was entirely gone. Rex looked at him. He had heard variations of this sentence before in courtrooms and hallways and parking lots, from men who believed that their continued presence in someone's life was a form of power they could wield forever. He had learned to listen for what it didn't say, which was usually more informative than what it did. Conrad hadn't threatened Lily. I had threatened Rex, which meant he still believed Rex was the obstacle, which meant he hadn't yet understood what the room had decided, which meant he was still operating on the assumption that clean papers in a smooth manner would determine the outcome of this night. I was wrong. Rex watched him go through the door. Then he looked at Lily. She was watching the door. Then she looked at her mug. Then she looked at Rex with the expression of someone emerging from something they hadn't been sure they would emerge from. "Is it going to be okay?" she asked. Rex considered giving her a reassurance that was neater than the truth. He had heard reassurances that were neater than the truth in his own life, and they had never made him trust the person who offered them. "I don't know everything that happens next," he said, "but I know that tonight you found the right room, and that the right people are going to make sure the right questions get asked." He looked at her steadily. "That's the part that was missing before, the right questions getting asked." Lily turned the mug slowly in her hands. "My mom tried to tell people," she said. "Before." She was quiet for a moment. "Nobody asked the right questions." Rex said nothing because there was nothing to say about that would make it smaller or larger than it was. "I asked," he said finally, "and there are more people asking now." Outside beyond the rain-blurred windows, Sheriff Holden was talking to Conrad Hargrove beside the black SUV, and Slade Mercer had positioned himself near the diner's front window where he could watch both the conversation outside and the girl inside without making either one feel observed. Donna had come around the counter with a plate of toast and set it in the middle of the table without asking. "You should eat something," she said to Lily. Lily looked at the toast, then at Rex. Then she picked up a piece and took a small, careful bite, and the ordinary human act of a child eating toast in a diner at midnight felt to Rex Dalton like something that mattered more than he had words for. His hands were steady on the table. The rain kept coming down. And somewhere out in the Nevada night, the complicated machinery of justice was beginning to move in the direction of a woman who had written a letter in November and a daughter who had been brave enough to walk into a lit room and ask for help. The night was not over, but it had turned. Frank Holden came back through the diner door alone. I was outside for 11 minutes. Rex watched the time on the clock above the pass-through, not because he was counting, but because he had learned that the length of a conversation outside a room told you something about the nature of the conversation. A short one meant one side had leverage. A medium one meant both sides were testing. 11 minutes meant Holden was listening more than he was talking, which was either very good or very bad, depending on what he was listening to. Conrad came in behind him 2 feet back and went directly to the front booth without looking at the rest of the room. Holden came to the counter. He spoke quietly to Donna for 2 minutes, and Rex watched Donna's expression change once in the way it had changed earlier. Not dramatically, just a small internal recalculation of someone who has received information that confirms something they suspected. Then Holden walked back to the last booth and pulled a chair from the adjacent table and sat on it backward the same way Slade had earlier, forearms on the top rail, making himself lower and less formal. "Mr. Hargrove has valid guardianship documents," Holden said, "signed by a family court judge in Clark County, effective February 28th. Lily's hands tightened around the mug. She didn't say anything. "That's 3 weeks after her mother's funeral," Rex said. "I'm aware." Rex looked at him. "How long does it usually take to establish emergency guardianship in Clark County?" Holden was quiet for a moment. "Faster than it should sometimes if the right people know the right people." He said it without inflection, the way you state a thing you have an opinion about, but are not in the position to state the opinion yet. "Mr. Hargrove's documentation is complete. I can't override it tonight based on what I have right now." Lily looked at the table. Something in her posture was bracing the slight inward compression of a person absorbing bad news they had been halfway expecting. Rex did not let the silence sit. "What can you do?" he asked Holden, not confrontationally, practically. "I can contact a child welfare supervisor. I can request that Lily receive a welfare check before any transfer of custody happens tonight. I can document everything in this room as part of an official record." Holden looked at Lily. "And I can ask you, young lady, if you want to speak with someone from Child Services before you leave this diner." Lily looked at him. "What would I tell them?" "Anything you want to, or nothing. It's your choice. But whatever you say gets written down by someone whose job is specifically to hear it." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What I told Mr. Dalton, I can tell them that—" "Everything," Holden said. "And the letter? That stays in the record either way. I've photographed it already, so there's a copy in the system regardless of what else happens." Lily looked at Rex. He gave her nothing but steady presence, the same way he'd been giving it to her for the past hour, letting her read the room and make her own calculation. She looked back at Holden. "Okay," she said. "I'll talk to them." Holden stood and reached for his radio. In the front booth, Conrad Hargrove was looking at his phone. Rex couldn't read his expression from the back of the room. He watched Conrad's hands, which were still, and his shoulders, which were not moving in the way relaxed shoulders moved. There was a tension in him that had been there from the moment the room hadn't reorganized around him the way he had expected. Rex thought about what Conrad had said outside the booth. "This isn't over." I thought about the plate on the bike in the parking lot, the information Conrad had pulled in 5 minutes. You didn't run plates in 5 minutes unless you had something to run them through. A connection to law enforcement or a service that provided the same access. I thought about Carla Vance, about a woman who had been careful and watchful and who had written a letter 10 weeks before she died, which meant she had known 10 weeks before she died that something was coming. I thought about a car accident in January. He looked at Slade. Slade had been watching him from the neighboring booth with the expression of a man who had been following the same thread and was waiting to see what Rex did with it. Rex moved his chin slightly toward the front of the diner, toward the door that led outside. Slade understood immediately and moved toward it naturally, like a man who needed some air, and stepped outside into the rain. Rex turned back to Lily. "Lily," he said carefully, "your mom's eagle tattoo. Did she ever say where she got it?" Lily looked at him. Something in her expression shifted not with suspicion, but with the attention of a child who has been told something oblique and is trying to understand the shape of it. She said a friend of hers drew it, a woman named someone who rode motorcycles. I don't remember the name. Did she ever talk about keeping something safe? Something she didn't want Conrad to find. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Rex could see her making a decision, the small, visible signs of it in her face, the internal weighing that children do when they have been keeping a secret that has been getting heavier. There was a bag, she said finally. Small, black. She called it her insurance. She told me if anything happened to her, I should find the people with the eagle tattoo and tell them she sent me, and they would know where it was. Rex felt something settle in his chest like a key turning. She sent it somewhere, he said. Not a question. Lily nodded. She said she mailed it a long time ago. Before Conrad, she said some people were keeping it for her because they kept things safe. Her voice dropped. I think I was supposed to find you. Rex sat with that for a moment. Then he said, she did, you did. He looked toward the door. Through the rain-blurred window, he could see Slade on the phone turned away from the diner, speaking with the focused urgency of a man delivering information that needed to move fast. In the front booth, Conrad was still on his phone. His posture had changed. He was leaning forward slightly now, which meant the call was not casual, which meant he was managing something or being managed. Holden had stepped outside to meet a county vehicle that had pulled in beside his cruiser, a gray sedan that had the particular nondescript quality of a government car. A woman got out, 40s practical clothes, a lanyard around her neck. Child welfare. The machinery was moving, but Conrad was also making calls. Rex understood in the specific way that experience teaches things without announcing them that there was a clock running. The child welfare supervisor would need time to do her work properly. Conrad had a lawyer's understanding of exactly how much time that was and exactly what he could do inside it. Whatever was on that phone call was designed to affect the outcome before the clock ran out. He needed to know what was in that bag. He looked at Donna, who had been moving quietly around the diner, keeping coffee cups full, and watching everything with the alertness of someone who had decided this room was her responsibility. Donna, he said, low enough to carry only a few feet. Is there a back office somewhere quiet? She looked at him, then at the front booth, then back. Stockroom through the kitchen. Can Slade use it for a phone call? She picked up the coffee pot. Tell him the code for the back door is 7741. Rex looked out the window and caught Slade's attention through the glass. He made a slight motion that Slade interpreted correctly because Slade had been reading Rex's signals for 22 years. The woman from the gray sit-in came through the diner door. She had the unhurried manner of someone experienced enough to know that urgency in her own demeanor would make things worse. She introduced herself to Holden, who was a few steps behind her, and then she came to the last booth. Her name was Sandra Keene. She explained who she was and what her role was clearly, without condescension. She asked Lily if she was comfortable. She asked if she could sit. Lily looked at Rex. He nodded once. Okay, Lily said. Rex moved to the next booth over, giving them space, keeping himself in Lily's sightline without being between her and the door. He listened without appearing to, in the way he had learned to listen in rooms where being visibly attentive was considered dangerous. Sandra Keene was good. She asked simple questions in simple language and listened to the answers without steering them. She asked about Lily's daily life with Conrad, about school meals, the house, about whether Lily had spoken to anyone she trusted. She did not ask about Conrad's behavior directly. She circled around it with patient skill, letting Lily bring things forward rather than naming them and asking Lily to confirm. And Lily talked, slowly at first, then with more confidence. The quiet voice of a child who had been told she was confused and was discovering in the presence of someone who was not telling her that she wasn't. Conrad had been watching from the front booth. He stood. I think this has gone far enough, he said, and his voice was still controlled, but the calibration was off now, the warmth replaced by something tighter that he was not quite managing to cover. She has a guardian. She needs to go home. This interview is highly irregular. Holden moved to intercept him before he had taken 2 steps. Mr. Hargrove, I need you to sit down. She is a minor in my legal care. Sit down. Holden's voice was still flat, but it had a quality now that it hadn't had before, the quality of a man who had finished being patient. The supervisor is conducting a mandatory welfare assessment. You do not have the authority to interrupt it. If you take another step toward that child, I will remove you from the premises. Conrad stopped. He looked at Holden, then at Rex, Then at the iron wolves distributed around the room, all of whom had gone very still in the way that men go still when they are deciding whether movement is required. He sat down. Rex turned back to the neighboring booth. Sandra Keene was still with Lily, and Lily had opened the backpack and was carefully taking things out: the pajamas, the crayons, the small brush, setting them on the table with the methodical care of a child who was showing someone the contents of her portable world. At the bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag, sealed with a rubber band, was a small orange prescription bottle. Rex saw it from 2 feet away. Sandra Keene saw it too. She asked very quietly where the bottle had come from. Lily said Conrad gave her a pill from it every morning. He said it was a vitamin. Sandra picked up the bottle with gloved hands. She turned it to read the label. There was no label. Rex felt something old and cold move through him. On an unlabeled prescription bottle, given to an 8-year-old daily by a man who had obtained legal guardianship 3 weeks after her mother's death. In a backpack the child carried everywhere because Conrad had told her to keep it with her. He looked at Holden, who had come down the row and was looking at the bottle over Sandra's shoulder. Their eyes met. Holden reached for his radio. "This is Holden, Millstone Diner. I need a medical unit at my location. Not urgent, precautionary. Also need to reach Detective Ferris at the state DCI." He paused. "Tell him it's about Conrad Hargrove." Conrad was on his feet before the words were out. "That is completely unwarranted. Sit down, Mr. Hargrove. Those are prescribed supplements. I have documentation. Then you'll have plenty of opportunity to share it with the state." Holden looked at him with the expression of a man who had been doing math in his head for the past 40 minutes and had just reached a total. "Sit down." Conrad sat, but something had changed in his face. The composure was still there, the training of it, the muscular habit of it, but underneath it something had shifted. The particular shift of a man who has built his position on the assumption that no single room would accumulate enough to threaten it, and is now in a room that might be doing exactly that. Rex looked at Lily. She was watching Conrad from across the diner, with an expression that he could not entirely read. It wasn't fear anymore, not exactly. It was something more complicated. The expression of a person looking at the thing that had been frightening them and finding that it looks smaller in the light. She looked at Rex. "The vitamin," she said very quietly. "It always made me feel foggy. I didn't like it, but he said I had to take it." Rex said nothing. He kept his face even. "My mom had foggy days," Lily continued. "Toward the end, she called them her bad days. She thought she was getting sick." Rex breathed slowly and deliberately, keeping the reaction internal, keeping his hands flat and still. "A woman who died in January in a car accident, who had been having bad days, who had written a letter in November saying something was coming and put it in her daughter's backpack, who had mailed something to people she trusted months before she died. The shape of it was coming clear in the way shapes come clear in smoke, slowly and then all at once." Sandra Keene had stepped away from the table to speak quietly with Holden. Rex heard fragments: blood panel, toxicology, the word chronic. He looked at Conrad. Conrad was looking at the window. His phone was still in his hand, but he wasn't using it anymore, and Rex thought he understood why. Whatever calls he'd been making in the past 20 minutes had been about the outcome of this night calls to the people who had helped him move through certain official channels, quickly calls designed to limit and contain. But the state DCI was a different category. State DCI meant the kind of attention that couldn't be managed with the same tools. He looked at Rex again across the length of the diner, and this time there was nothing managed about his expression. It was the bare face of a man who had been entirely certain of his position and was becoming less certain with each passing minute. Rex held his gaze without hostility, without satisfaction, without anything that could be described as a threat. He simply looked at him the way you look at something that has revealed what it actually is after spending considerable time being something else. Slade came through the front door with rain on his jacket and something in his expression that was controlled but alive. He came directly to Rex and sat in the adjacent booth and put his forearms on the table. He spoke low enough that it carried no further than 2 feet. "We have the package," Slade said. Rex felt his chest open. "Where?" "Storage unit in Henderson. Carla had our chapter there as a contact 10 years ago. She mailed it to the Henderson address 3 years ago. The brothers there had it logged but didn't know what it was. When I called with the name and the situation, they went and opened it." "What's in it?" Slade looked at him. "A drive and a phone and 3 notebooks." He paused. "The notebooks go back 5 years. She was keeping track of everything. Financial records that don't match his stated income. Prescriptions for drugs that he told her were for something else. Dates and amounts and descriptions. He paused again and the pause had weight. And a recording, he said, from October, her own voice. 22 minutes. She recorded herself going through everything, explaining it, naming him by name. He looked at the front booth. She knew she had been building the file for 2 years. Rex was quiet for a moment. Carla Vance had known what she was dealing with. She had known precisely. And she had done what a careful, smart woman does when she has no official channels she can trust. She had built the record herself, and she had mailed it to the only people she was certain would keep it safe. The Iron Wolves had been keeping it for 3 years without knowing what they had. Get it to Holden, Rex said, through the right channels. Chain of custody matters. Already moving. Brackett is driving it to the county evidence lockup. Holden's deputy is meeting him there. Rex nodded. He looked at Lily. She had been watching him and Slade with that focused attention she brought to everything. She couldn't have heard what they said, but she was reading the room, and what she read made something in her face change. The first was genuinely different expression she had worn since Rex had sat down across from her. Not relief exactly, something more tentative and more real. The beginning of believing something she had been afraid to believe. It's your mom's insurance, Rex said to her quietly. Lily's eyes filled, not dramatically, not with the overwhelmed crying of a child in distress, but with the slow filling of someone absorbing something too large to respond to quickly. She kept it safe, Lily said. For you, Rex said. She kept it safe for you. Outside, another set of headlights was coming in from the highway. Not county, unmarked. The kind of unmarked that wasn't trying hard to look like anything but what it was. State DCI. The night was about to change again. Rex looked at Conrad Hargrove, who had seen the headlights too, and was doing the math in the way that men do math when the variables have shifted past recovery. His hands, which had been still for the last 20 minutes, were not entirely still anymore. Rex watched him the way you watch something that has run out of options and is making its final calculation. Sandra Keene had moved back to Lily's table. The medical unit was 3 minutes out. Holden had positioned himself between Conrad and the exit with the casual certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The diner had become something different from what it had been at midnight. It had become a room where the truth had arrived and was making itself permanent, written into official logs and custody chains and evidence bags, past the point where one man's paperwork and smooth manner could dissolve it. Lily reached across the table and touched the edge of Rex's sleeve, the same frayed place on the same worn jacket that he had worn in through the rain. And the gesture was so similar to what Carla's daughter might have learned from watching her mother move through the world that it hit Rex somewhere below the level of language. Thank you, she said, for not leaving. He looked at her. That was never an option. She looked at him, at the eagle tattoo below his cuff, at the Iron Wolves patch, at the face of a man who had spent 6 years in a cage for something he hadn't done, and had come out the other side without losing the part of himself that recognized a child asking for help. I know, she said. That's why I picked you. Outside, the unmarked car doors opened, and 2 figures in plain clothes moved toward the diner with the purposeful pace of people who had been briefed on the way there and knew exactly what they were walking into. The front doorbell rang, and Conrad Hargrove in the booth nearest the door looked once more around the room that had decided in the space of 90 minutes exactly what it believed and exactly who it was going to protect. He looked at his phone. He put it in his pocket, and he said nothing. The 2 DCI investigators were a man and a woman, both mid-40s, both carrying the particular focused neutrality of people who had arrived with prior knowledge and were now confirming it against what they found in the room. The woman had dark hair cut short in the kind of stillness in her face that said she had seen this particular configuration of facts before. The man carried a bag that had the functional look of equipment rather than a briefcase. They spoke to Holden at the door for 2 minutes, and then the woman went to Conrad's booth while Holden came back down the road to Rex. Detective Mara Voss, Holden said quietly for Rex's benefit. State DCI Financial Crimes Unit. She's been looking at Hargrove for 14 months. Rex looked at him. 14 months. Carla Briggs wasn't the first, Holden said. He said it with the flatness of a man stating a fact he didn't enjoy stating. There were 2 others, both widowed women with minor children. Both resulted in rapid guardianship transfers after the women died, under circumstances that were ruled accidental. He paused. The cases were in different counties. Nobody connected them until a welfare worker in Henderson noticed the pattern 18 months ago and filed a report. Rex looked toward Voss at the front booth. Conrad was sitting very still now, the composed patience entirely replaced by something more fundamental. The stillness of a man who understood that his situation was no longer about managing the narrative in a Nevada diner, but about the distance between tonight and whatever came after. He went after women with children, Rex said. Women with assets. The children were, Holden paused. The children were complications he found ways to manage. Rex thought about the unlabeled pill bottle. I thought about Lily saying the pills made her foggy. He thought about Carla's bad days. I thought about what it meant to manage a complication. He looked at Lily, who was with Sandra Keene and the paramedics who had arrived 3 minutes ago and were doing their quiet professional work, and he felt something in his chest that had the heat and weight of something he didn't usually permit himself to feel in public. She kept records, Rex said. Voss knows about this drive. We're treating it as evidence in an ongoing investigation. It was material we've been looking for. Holden looked at him. How Carla Briggs knew to send it to Iron Wolf's storage is something I'm going to need to understand eventually. She trusted them to keep things safe, Rex said. She was right. Holden held his gaze for a moment. That's all it was. That's all it was. Holden accepted this with the pragmatism of a man who understood that some answers were complete without being comprehensive, and that pursuing incompleteness in this particular direction was not what the situation required. At the front booth, Conrad was now being read his rights by the male DCI investigator who was doing it quietly and without drama, in the professional register of someone for whom this was the technical conclusion of a process rather than a performance. Conrad did not protest. He did not demand a lawyer loudly or make any of the moves that people in crime dramas made at this moment. He simply looked ahead with the face of a man who had been building something for a long time and had just watched it finish being built and had arrived at the understanding that it was not what he had thought he was building. Rex watched him being escorted to the door and felt nothing that could be described as triumph. What he felt was something quieter and more lasting, the particular satisfaction of a room that had held of people who had not moved from where they needed to be, of a child who had been brave enough to walk toward rather than away. The diner bell rang as Conrad went through the door. When it closed, the room changed in the way rooms change when a wrong note has been playing under everything else and is suddenly absent. Donna went behind the counter and turned on the radio. Low, a country station from Reno, and the sound of it was so ordinary and so correct that the trucker in the yellow rain jacket started laughing. Not loudly, just a short surprise sound, and then stopped and looked at his coffee with the expression of someone who wasn't entirely sure why that had happened. Lily was sitting with Sandra Keene and one of the paramedics. The paramedic had checked her blood pressure and temperature and had taken a small sample of the pill from the unlabeled bottle, which was now in an evidence bag. He had told Lily in a voice designed to be matter-of-fact, without being dismissive, that they were going to send the sample to a lab to find out what was in it, which was the right thing to do, which meant they were taking good care of her. Lily had nodded. Then she had said, "My Aunt Ruth is coming." Sandra confirmed this. Ruth Briggs was 90 minutes out driving from Reno, had been reached by phone by Holden's deputy, and was already in the car. She had cried apparently when she was told Lily was safe, and then she had said she was on the road and she was not stopping. Rex sat in the neighboring booth. He had been offered coffee twice and had both times agreed and then not drunk it while it went cold. He was aware of being tired in the deep way that comes not from physical exertion, but from the sustained expenditure of a particular kind of attention, the attention of someone who is managing a room and a child and a situation and himself simultaneously. Slade came and sat across from him. For a while, they didn't say anything. The radio played. The rain had softened to a light patter that was almost comfortable rather than threatening. Holden was outside dealing with the DCI vehicle and whatever additional units had been called. The diner had thinned out the older couple, having left during the commotion, the trucker still at his stool, but quieter now. 14 months, Slade said eventually. Holden came back to the booth after he finished with the DCI investigators and sat down across from Rex with the expression of a man who had just processed a great deal of information in a short time and was organizing it into the sequence most useful for the conversation he needed to have. Voss has been building this case for over a year, Holden said. She told me on the way in that Hargrove has a law license in 3 states. He knows exactly how to position himself around grieving women with complicated estates. He finds them in the period right after a significant loss, offers legal services, becomes indispensable, and then maneuvers himself into a position of financial and personal control. He paused. The first 2 women didn't have children. Carla Briggs did. Lily was a complication, Rex said. A complication he had a solution for. Holden glanced toward the evidence bag on the counter where Sandra Keene had placed the unlabeled bottle. The lab is going to take a few days, but Voss's read based on what we described is consistent with what they found in the second case. A sedative that reduces alertness and memory consolidation in children. Not immediately harmful, but used chronically over months. He stopped. Rex looked at the table. Lily told me the pills made her foggy, Rex said. She did. Holden was quiet for a moment. She also told Sandra that Conrad told her the foggy feeling meant the vitamins were working, that her body was getting healthier and it would pass. He paused again. She believed him for a while, until she didn't. Rex thought about the letter in the broken zippered pocket, written in November, which meant Carla Briggs had begun to understand what was happening to her at least 2 months before January. And before she died, she had written everything down and sent it to people she trusted and told her daughter to find those people if something happened. She had been in the most precise sense trying to save her daughter from what had already killed her. Rex looked at Holden. The car accident. Holden held his gaze. Voss has a theory she's not yet prepared to state as anything other than a theory. But the accident is part of the 14 months. It is now. Rex was quiet. He thought about the road outside Henderson on a night in January. He thought about a woman who had built a file for 2 years and mailed it to safe hands and written a letter to her daughter and then died in a car accident on a road where there was no ice. I thought about what kind of man could sit in the front booth of a diner and perform warmth while the truth was being assembled around him. I thought about how many times that man had done this before and gotten away with it because the pieces were in different counties and different jurisdictions, and nobody had been in the right position to see the whole pattern at once until a welfare worker in Henderson had sat at a desk and looked at the file from the right angle. And then he stopped thinking about it because Lily was in the room and she needed the next hour to be about her safety and not about the full weight of what had been done to her mother. There would be time later to carry that. He looked at Sandra Keene, who was sitting with Lily, speaking in the low, careful voice of someone who was doing their job with exceptional skill. He watched Lily's face as Sandra spoke, the careful, attentive expression of a child who had learned to listen for what people meant underneath what they said. She was going to be all right. Not immediately, not easily, but she had the fundamental equipment for it, the intelligence and the watchfulness and the willingness to trust when trust was demonstrated rather than simply claimed. Her mother had given her those things. Her mother had given her a great deal. There's one more thing, Holden said. Rex looked at him. Hargrove. When Voss read him his rights, he asked for his lawyer, which was expected. And then before the lawyer was on the phone, he said something to Voss that she told me in the parking lot. Holden paused. He said she was too careful. He didn't say her name, but it was clear who he meant. He said she was too careful and it still didn't work. Rex felt something move through his chest that was old and heavy and had a long history. I was angry, Rex said. I was, which means he's been angry for a while, which means the file, the recordings, the notebooks, they weren't just insurance for Carla. They were insurance against exactly the kind of rage that comes from a man who believes he has controlled everything and discovers he hasn't. Rex looked at the counter where the evidence bag sat. 22 minutes of a woman's voice, clear and organized and naming everything. Rage from a man who thought he had won. And a daughter who had walked into a lit room and chosen correctly. She planned everything, Rex said. She planned everything, Holden agreed. Rex looked at Lily. She was watching him and Holden from across the booth, with the expression she wore when she was computing something, the particular focused stillness of a child absorbing information through the register of adult faces and deciding what it meant. Rex gave her nothing alarming. He kept his face even and present and calm, the same face he had been giving her all night, the face of a person who was in the room and intended to remain. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back to her conversation with Sandra Keene. And Rex thought about Carla Vance 12 years ago, watching a man in a Nevada summer with those attentive, observing eyes filing what she saw, deciding what she trusted. I thought about what it meant to be seen accurately by someone who then chose to trust what they saw. I thought it was one of the rarest things in the world. He picked up the cold coffee and drank it. He stayed. Yeah, he did this to other women. Yeah. Slade was quiet for a moment, and Carla knew. She suspected. She built the file over 2 years. Rex looked at his cold coffee. She didn't have anyone official she could trust with it. She knew that if she handed it to the wrong person, it would disappear. So she mailed it to us. She mailed it to Henderson. She had met people there years ago. People she trusted because she'd watched how they operated. She knew the file would sit untouched until someone came looking for it. Slade looked at him. She planned for the scenario where she couldn't come looking herself. Rex said nothing because there was nothing to add to that. They sat for another minute in the particular quiet of men who have known each other long enough that silence is not uncomfortable. The daughter, Slade said. She's going to be all right. Yeah, you staying until the aunt gets here. Rex looked toward Lily, who was talking to Sandra Keene in a low voice, gesturing once with her hands, as if explaining something that required spatial context. Her face was different from the face she'd had when he first sat across from her. Not unafraid, not uncomplicated, but something more open than it had been. Something that looked like a person beginning the long process of recovering their own voice. I'll stay, Rex said. Slade nodded. A second Iron Wolves prospect came in from the parking lot and reported quietly to Slade that the Henderson Drive and the notebooks were en route to county evidence lockup with full chain of custody documentation, that Breckett had Holden's deputy on the phone throughout the handoff, and that the phone found in the storage package had been handed directly to Detective Voss at the door. 22 minutes of Carla Briggs's voice recorded in October naming names. 3 years in an Iron Wolves storage unit in Henderson. Delivered tonight because a child had been brave enough to walk into a diner and ask for help. Rex thought about the way things converged. The way Carla had drawn the threads of her protection over years quietly and without asking permission, because asking permission was not available to her. The woman he had known briefly had clearly been exceptional in the way some people are exceptional, not through dramatic action, but through the accumulation of careful invisible work done in the face of something that was trying to make them small. She had not been made small. She had put everything she had into protecting her daughter, and her daughter had found the door. The clock above the pass-through read 2:17 in the morning. Donna came to his booth and set down a fresh cup of coffee this time without asking, and a plate of pie that had not been on the menu. Apple, she said. Last slice, you should eat it. Rex looked at it. Thank you, Donna. She waved the thanks away with the small, dismissive motion of a woman who was not interested in gratitude but had done what she considered necessary. She went back behind the counter. He ate the pie. It was good, the filling thick and sweet, the crust made from scratch by someone who understood that the texture of the bottom crust mattered. He ate it slowly in the diner's quiet warmth, with the radio playing low and the rain barely there anymore, and Slade sitting across from him, not talking, and it was the most ordinary grounding thing he had experienced in 93 days. At the last booth, Lily had fallen asleep. She had listed sideways in the corner of the booth, her cheek against her backpack, the stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, and Sandra Keene had draped a thin emergency blanket over her without waking her. Her face in sleep was the face of a child rather than the face of a person managing a crisis, and the difference was so complete and so clear that Rex had to look away for a moment. He looked at his hands on the table, scarred, large, marked with the evidence of 30 years of work and weather and bad decisions and good ones. The eagle tattoo below his right cuff matching in style, if not in exact design the one Carla Vance had carried. The Iron Wolves emblem on his cut faded at the edges now. He had been a man who could not protect himself from a false accusation, who had lost 6 years in a daughter's letters and a woman's funeral to a court that had eventually admitted it was wrong. Tonight, he had been in the right place at the right time with the right stillness. That was all. He hadn't fought anyone. He hadn't threatened anyone. He had simply been the thing that a room needed to organize itself around, and he had let the room do the work. I thought about his daughter. Somewhere in this country, there was a woman in her mid-20s who had stopped writing letters when she was 18, who had been 17 and ashamed and alone with a father in prison for something her teenage understanding had not been equipped to fully process. I was going to find her. Not tonight. Tonight was this diner, this child, this rain-soaked Nevada County road. But after this, he was going to find her. I was going to ask her the question he should have asked 8 years ago. The question he had been afraid would have an answer he couldn't bear. I was going to ask, are you safe? And then whatever the answer, he was going to be the door. Ruth Briggs was an hour out. The DCI investigators were outside. Conrad Hargrove was in a county cruiser. The evidence was in the proper hands. And in the last booth of Millstone Diner, a little girl slept under an emergency blanket with her mother's instructions tucked in a broken zippered pocket in a room full of adults who had chosen for one Nevada night to be exactly what was needed. Rex finished the pie. He put his fork down. He looked at the window where the rain had nearly stopped, and the parking lot was lit in the blue-white of a deputy's idle cruiser, and the first faint gray-pink of pre-dawn was becoming visible at the far horizon. The night had been long, but it had held. Ruth Briggs arrived at 3:41 in the morning. She drove a white Subaru with a cracked windshield and one wiper that was a replacement brand that didn't quite match the other. She pulled into the Millstone lot at a speed that suggested she had been exceeding the limit on the empty highway and had remembered to slow down only when she saw the deputy's cruiser. Rex watched her through the window. She was 40, maybe 42, with the blonde hair that Lily's brown hair would eventually recall once you saw them together, and the look of someone who had been white-knuckling a steering wheel for 90 minutes without releasing it once. She sat in the car for 30 seconds after she parked, and Rex could see her through the windshield doing the thing people do when they have been running on emergency and are trying to find the gear for whatever comes next. Then she got out of the car. She came through the diner door and stopped, and her eyes found Lily asleep in the last booth in the time it took most people to walk 2 steps. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. Her shoulders rose once with the breath of someone absorbing a thing they have been afraid to allow themselves to fully imagine until the moment they could confirm it. Sandra Keene met her near the door and spoke quietly. Ruth nodded, still watching the booth, and then her eyes moved to Rex, and she looked at him, the way Lily had looked at him in the first 30 seconds. Not with fear, not with the socialized wariness of a woman encountering a biker in a late-night diner, but with the clear directness of someone making an immediate and considered assessment. She came down the row. She stopped at the booth where Rex was sitting and looked at him. "You're Rex Dalton," she said. "Yes." She reached into her jacket pocket and took out a small, folded piece of paper. All the folds worn soft, and put it on the table between them. Rex opened it. It was a name, his name written in handwriting he recognized from the letter in Lily's backpack. Carla Vance had sent it to Ruth years ago, in case Ruth told him. She said, "In case I ever need help and Lily can't reach me. There is a man named Rex Dalton who rides with the Iron Wolves in Nevada. She said he would know her if he heard her name. She said he was the kind of person who would stop." Rex looked at the paper. "I thought about Carla Vance 12 years ago, passing through the Iron Wolves territory on her way to whatever she was building her life into after." He had not known her well. They had spoken a handful of times at the fire behind the Henderson chapter at a gas station outside Boulder City. He had known she was smart and watchful, and that she noticed everything. Apparently, she had also noticed him. He folded the paper and pushed it back to Ruth. "How did she die?" he asked. Ruth sat down. She pulled the paper back and held it. "Single car accident on a 2-lane outside Henderson. January 9th. Black ice," they said. "Her car left the road and hit a drainage barrier." She looked at him. It had been 53 degrees the day before. There was no ice reported anywhere on that road. 3 other drivers went through in the hour before and after. Rex was quiet. "I tried to get an independent investigation," Ruth said. "I hired a lawyer. He told me I had nothing that could be called evidence that the ruling was clean, and that pursuing it would cost more than I had." She looked toward the front of the diner, toward the direction Conrad Hargrove had gone. "And then Conrad was Lily's guardian, and he made it very difficult for me to see her." "How difficult?" "He told the court I was a destabilizing influence. He said I was feeding Lily a narrative that was interfering with her healing process." Ruth said it with the flatness of someone who has rehearsed the outrage out of a fact because carrying the outrage was too expensive. "He had a therapist's report. He always had the right paperwork." Rex looked at the door. "He won't have the paperwork now," Rex said. Ruth looked at him. "What do you mean?" he told her. "Not all of it. The outline of it, the drive, the notebooks, Carla's recorded voice naming everything she had documented over 2 years." He watched Ruth's face as he told her and saw the specific expression of someone whose understanding of a loss is restructuring itself around a new piece of information, the way bones reignite around a fracture differently than they were before. Her eyes filled. She didn't let the tears fall. She was the kind of woman who decided when to cry, he thought. "She was building it the whole time," Ruth said. "She was protecting Lily the only way she had." Ruth looked at her sister's daughter, asleep in the corner of the last booth, and she put her hand flat on the table and breathed deliberately, and then she looked at Rex. "Carla was right about you," she said. Rex said nothing. "She said you were the kind of man who knew what it meant to be wrongly accused of something," Ruth said. "She said that made you careful about accusations, that you didn't jump to what you wanted to be true. You waited for what was actually true." Rex thought about 6 years in a cell. "She knew about that," he said. "She followed the case," Ruth said simply. After she had left Nevada and built her life and had Lily, she followed it. When you were exonerated, she wrote your name on that paper and mailed it to me. He sat with that for a moment. A woman he had known for a few months at the edge of his life, had watched from a distance as his life was taken apart by a false accusation, had watched him get it back, and had written his name down as someone she trusted to be in the room when her daughter needed a room. I didn't have a word for what that felt like. He looked at Lily. She was beginning to stir some awareness of the changed atmosphere in the room, working through her sleep. She turned slightly, and her eyes opened halfway, and she looked at the booth with the unfocused softness of a child waking from a deep sleep. And then she saw Ruth. She sat up, and something in her face that had been holding since January came undone completely. "Aunt Rue," she said. The two words had the sound of something that had been waiting a long time to be said. Ruth was around the table and onto the bench beside her before Rex had finished his exhale, and she held Lily the way she had clearly been wanting to hold her since January, carefully but completely. Her hand on the back of her head, her face pressed into her niece's hair, rocking once and then going still. "I'm here," Ruth said. "I'm so sorry it took this long. I'm here." Rex looked at Donna. Donna was looking at the window. Her hands were on the counter and her throat was working with something she had decided not to let out in a room full of strangers. Rex got up from the booth. He walked to the counter and sat on the stool near Donna and picked up the cold coffee and held it, not drinking it, just holding it. "You did good tonight," he said to her. The sign in the window, the call, all of it. Donna kept looking at the window for a moment. Then she said, "It's just a laminated card." "No," Rex said, "it's not." She looked at him. He looked back. And after a moment she nodded once, the slight, firm nod of a woman who had decided to accept the truth of a thing that mattered. Outside, the dawn was coming. The rain had stopped entirely, and the Nevada sky in the east was the particular shade of dark blue that means the sun is on the other side of the horizon, close enough to change the color of things without yet changing the things themselves. Rex looked at his reflection in the diner window. He looked like what he was, 58 years old, gray and weathered and marked by roads and years and a 6-year interruption that had changed the shape of everything. He did not look like the version of himself he might have been without it. But he looked like a man who had been exactly where he needed to be tonight, in the last booth. Ruth Briggs had Lily in her arms, and Lily had her face pressed against her aunt's shoulder, and the stuffed rabbit was between them, worn and flat, with years of being loved. The night was over. The morning was beginning. And Rex Dalton sat at the counter of Millstone Diner and drank the cold coffee and watched the sky change and thought about his daughter and a letter he was finally going to write. 3 weeks after the night in Millstone, the state's case against Conrad Hargrove had expanded to 4 counties and 11 investigative agencies. Rex learned this not from a newspaper but from Holden, who called him on a Wednesday morning while he was in the shop outside Reno, working on a transmission. Rebuilt, his hands covered in grease, the phone wedged between his shoulder and his jaw, the way men do when they are not willing to stop what they are doing but cannot ignore the call. Holden told him that the drive from Henderson had been central, that Carla's notebooks corroborated the financial records the DCI had been assembling independently for 14 months, that the recording her voice in October, 22 minutes of clear and organized testimony, had given the investigators the structural timeline they needed to connect 3 separate jurisdictions. He told him that the unlabeled pills were a sedative compound not approved for pediatric use, and that the level found in the sample, combined with the duration of Lily's reported exposure, was consistent with chronic low-dose administration. He said that slowly and then let the silence after it be what it was. Rex kept working on the transmission. His hands moved through the familiar steps, removing and cleaning and assessing each component with the particular attention of someone who trusts the intelligence of their hands when the rest of them is occupied elsewhere. "What about the other women?" he asked. "One of them from Clark County. Her sister has retained a lawyer. There are petitions to reopen the inquest." Holden paused. "The second one we haven't been able to locate next of kin, but the physical evidence from her case has been sent for a second review. Conrad is in custody since the night in the diner. Denied bail." Another pause. "His lawyer argued that you created a hostile environment that prejudiced his client's rights, that your presence and the presence of the Iron Wolves constituted intimidation." Rex said nothing. "The judge reviewed the diner footage," Holden said. "She noted that no member of your group took any physical action, made any threat, or prevented Mr. Hargrove from leaving or speaking. She noted further that the child welfare assessment was conducted entirely through proper official channels." A breath. She denied the motion. Rex set down a bolt and picked up another. How's Lily, he asked. Ruth Briggs formally petitioned for custody in Clark County. The guardianship documents have been suspended pending the criminal investigation. Lily has been with her aunt since that morning. Holden's voice had something different in it now, a quality that the official register couldn't entirely cover. She's doing okay. Ruth says she's sleeping better. Rex put the phone down when Holden said goodbye and stared at the transmission for a long time. Sleeping better. He had been sleeping better too, which surprised him because better sleep was not something he had expected to return quickly. Prison had done things to his relationship with sleep that he assumed would take years to undo. The hypervigilance, the inability to stay under more than a few hours, the way his body had decided that darkness and quiet were more threat than rest. But since Millstone, he had been sleeping 4, 5, 6 hours at a stretch and waking not to the sound of institutional doors, but to the quiet of the shop, the smell of oil and metal, the Nevada morning coming in under the bay door. I didn't examine it too closely. He just noted it and picked up his wrench and went back to work. He wrote the letter to his daughter the following Saturday. He had been composing it in his head for 3 months, which meant he had written it many times and destroyed it many times. And the Saturday he actually sat down and put pen to paper. He was surprised by how much of it he already knew. The words came not in the fumbling way of someone trying to construct a message, but in the way of something that had been ready for a while and was waiting for the moment to be set down. He didn't explain. He didn't justify. He didn't ask her to understand what she might not be ready to understand. He said he had been wrong to go quiet. He said that the silence from inside the prison had been his cowardice, not his punishment. He said that she had not been abandoned, that he had never stopped thinking about her, that the shame he had felt at what his situation might cost her had become the thing that cost her. He said he was not asking for anything. He said he was going to be in Reno for the foreseeable future. He gave the shop's address. He said the door was open. He mailed it on Monday. He did not wait for a response that might not come. He went back to work. He wrote on weekends. He fixed things that were broken the way he had always been best at doing, and he let the days accumulate. On the last Thursday of the month, a girl came into the shop. She was 25 years old, brown-haired, thin, in the way of someone who had been eating adequately but not generously for a long time. She was wearing a jacket that was too light for the October morning and carrying a backpack over one shoulder, and she stopped in the open bay door with the posture of someone who had been rehearsing the moment of arrival and found that the real moment was different from the rehearsed one. Rex was under a truck. He heard the footsteps stop. He came out from under the truck and stood and looked at her. He had not seen her in 8 years. She had been 17 with the angry and frightened face of a teenager whose father had just been sentenced to a decade in a prison that had eventually given him back in 6 years. She had her mother's coloring and his build, and standing in his shop doorway. At 25, she looked like both of those things simultaneously in a way that hit him behind the sternum. Dad, she said, it came out careful, not warm, not cold, just present. The word of someone testing whether the word fit anymore. Haley, he said. They stood across from each other in the bay doorway, with the October morning behind her and the oil smell of the shop around them. And for a moment, neither of them said anything because the thing between them was too large for the first words to be anything but provisional. I got your letters, she said. I know. I wasn't going to come. I know. I drove from Sacramento. A pause. I pulled over twice. Rex said nothing. He let her say what she needed to say, in whatever order she needed to say it. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said. I don't know if I ever will be. I don't know what that means yet. She looked at him steadily with eyes that were his own, the same gray, the same quality of giving nothing away before the assessment was complete. But I needed to see if you were real, the person in the letter. I needed to see if that was actually you, or if you were just, she stopped. Just performing something, he said. She looked at him. Yeah, Rex looked at his hands. The grease, the scars, the eagle tattoo. The wrench still in his right fist. He set it down on the workbench. I'm not performing anything, he said. I don't know how to do this correctly. I'm just here. Haley looked at him for a long time. Then she walked into the shop. She didn't hug him. She came in and stood beside the truck he had been working on and looked at the engine the way people look at things when they are deciding where to put themselves in a space. What's wrong with it? She said. Timing chain, he said. Previous owner ignored the intervals. She nodded. She put her backpack down against the wall and looked around the shop at the tools in the lift and the calendar on the wall and the drawing above the workbench. She stopped at the drawing. Rex watched her look at it. A child's drawing on plain paper, the lines made with crayon and pressed with 8-year-old certainty, showing a diner in the rain, and two figures, one small and one large. And between them, the specific dynamic that a child in her position had known exactly how to draw because she had lived inside it. Haley looked at it for a long time. "Who made that?" she said. "A girl named Lily," Rex said. "She left it for me." "How old?" "8." Haley looked at the drawing, at the large figure standing in the rain, steady as a tree with the small one beside it. At the way the child had drawn it, not with the large figure looming or threatening, but simply there present the thing that the smaller figure was standing next to rather than hiding behind. "She drew you how she saw you," Haley said. "Yeah," Rex said. Haley was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I used to draw pictures of you when I was little. Before everything, I drew you big like that." She didn't say it with recrimination or sentiment, just with the flat accuracy of someone stating a thing they had remembered. Rex felt the weight of the years between that drawing and this morning press against him. I didn't try to compress it or explain it or make it smaller. He just let it be what it was. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't say that." Haley looked at the drawing for another moment. Then she looked at him. "I don't know what I want from this," she said. "I don't know what's possible. I don't know if I can." She stopped. "I'm just here today. That's all I can promise." "That's enough," Rex said. "That's more than enough." She nodded. She picked up her backpack and slung it back on her shoulder, and for a moment he thought she was leaving, and he held himself stilled against the instinct to speak or move or change the terms of what she had offered. But she only moved to the workbench and sat on the stool that lived there, the old wooden one that had been in the shop since before he bought it. "Tell me about the girl in the drawing," she said. So he did. I told her about Millstone Diner and the rain and the child in the last booth with the lightning bolt backpack. He told her about the letter in the broken zippered pocket in the pill bottle with no label, and the notebook that a woman had been keeping for 2 years while she died slowly in a quiet Nevada house. He told her about Conrad Hargrove and Sheriff Holden and Slade at the counter and the 22-minute recording that a woman had made in October with the full knowledge of what it was for. He told her about the eagle tattoo, about Carla Vance passing through the Iron Wolves world years ago with the particular watchfulness of someone building something they needed to protect. He told her about a woman who had sent her daughter to him with a set of instructions encoded in the things she had taught her, and a name written on a paper mailed to her sister, in a belief apparently that if the worst happened, he would be the kind of person who stopped. He talked for 40 minutes, and Haley sat on the stool and listened without interrupting. And when he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "She trusted you," Haley said. "That woman. She trusted you from years ago when she barely knew you." "She trusted what she observed," Rex said. "That's the same thing." Rex thought about that. "Maybe," he said. Haley looked at the drawing again. "Did Lily get to her aunt?" "She's with her, in Reno." Haley's eyes came back to him. "Does she know you're here close?" Rex thought about Ruth Briggs' call last week. The matter-of-fact conversation about how Lily's counseling was going, and whether Rex would want to hear an update periodically. He thought about saying yes. "She knows," he said. Something in Haley's expression changed, not dramatically, but something shifted in the direction of understanding, of seeing not just the story he had told, but the shape of the person inside it. "You stayed," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was more like a recognition. When you could have left, when you had every reason to not get involved, you stayed. Rex looked at his hands. "I've had practice being in rooms where leaving wasn't the right thing." Haley looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay, show me the timing chain." He picked up the wrench, and they worked side by side for 2 hours in the Reno morning, not talking much, not needing to, in the practical quiet of two people who were finding their way back toward each other through the only language that was honest enough to hold the weight of what they had been to each other and what they might become. The drawing stayed above the workbench. Lily's diner in the rain. Two figures in the dark. One large, one small, neither one alone. Haley called on a Thursday in March, 3 weeks after her second visit, and the call was different from the ones before it in the specific way that things shift when the initial effort of a thing has settled into something less effortful and more habitual. She called from her lunch break, which Rex knew because he could hear the sound of a shop in the background, the particular acoustic quality of a workspace with high ceilings and metal surfaces. She had not told him she was calling from work. She had just called, which meant she had stopped calculating whether the call was appropriate and had simply made it because it was the thing she felt like doing. He noted this the way you note a change in weather when you've been watching the sky carefully for a long time. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing consequential. A customer she'd had that morning with an unreasonable expectation about a head gasket, a stretch of highway between Sacramento and Reno that was being repaved and had delayed her the last time she drove north. A radio station he'd mentioned that she had found and was deciding whether she liked. When she hung up, he sat with the phone for a moment. I thought about the years of silence between them, about the specific weight of a silence that has lasted long enough to become structural, to become the default condition of a relationship, so that communication becomes the exception that has to be justified rather than the ordinary thing that simply happens. They were building the habit of the ordinary thing. It was slow, it was sometimes awkward in the way that habits are awkward in their forming phase before they become smooth. But it was happening, and the fact of its happening felt like the most significant thing in his life at the moment, which surprised him slightly, given everything else that had happened in the preceding 6 months. He put the phone down and went back to the transmission. The next time Haley came up from Sacramento, she brought her own tools. Not a full set, just the ones she used most often tucked in a roll of canvas that had the particular worn quality of tools that had been used regularly for several years. She unpacked them without ceremony on the corner of the workbench, and they worked side by side for 5 hours on a differential rebuild that had been waiting for a second pair of hands. She was not trying to prove anything. That was what Rex noticed. She worked the way she worked in her own shop with quiet confidence and the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing this long enough that the technique had become transparent, invisible. Just the work itself happening through trained hands. Toward the end of the afternoon, she asked him about the Iron Wolves, not confrontationally, not with the specific charge quality that the subject had carried in the years before his incarceration, when it had been the thing between them that couldn't be discussed without becoming an argument about the gap between who he said he was and how he actually lived. She asked with genuine curiosity, as if she were asking about a professional association she wanted to understand accurately. He told her the truth of it. The parts that were what people assumed and the parts that weren't. The brotherhood of it, which was real and complicated and not romanticizable if you had been inside it long enough to see it clearly. The violence that had existed in earlier years and the ways the chapter had moved away from it, not entirely, not perfectly, but deliberately and with consequence for those who didn't follow the shift. The night in Millstone and the 6 men who had simply positioned themselves around a room and held still in what that stillness had made possible. Haley listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Breckett, she said, the one who drove the evidence. Is he the same one who called you when Mom was sick? Rex stopped. He looked at her. You remember that, he said. I remember everything, she said. Not with anger, just with the flat accuracy she had inherited from him, the same inability to pretend that things hadn't happened. I was 12. He called the house because you weren't answering your phone. I talked to him for a few minutes. He was very polite. He said he hoped Mom got better. Rex was quiet. She did get better, Haley said. That time. Yeah, I didn't know what the Iron Wolves were at 12. I just knew they were part of your world, and your world was something I wasn't fully inside. She set down her wrench. I think that was the thing, not the club specifically, just the feeling of there being a world I wasn't inside. Rex looked at the bench. I know. I understand more about it now. Why you needed something like that. I don't know if I think it was the right choice. She picked up the wrench again. But I understand the need for it. Rex looked at her profile bent over the differential. The line of her jaw and the way she held tools, the particular shape of focused attention she wore when the work required it, and he felt the full weight of the years between them. Not as loss exactly, but as distance that was slowly becoming traversable. I should have made you more inside it, he said. Not the club, just me. I should have made you more inside my actual life. Haley didn't look up. Yeah, she said, you should have. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, the girl, Lily, you said her counselor sent you a note. Yeah, what did it say? I told her. Haley was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she's right, you know, that asking for help is something that works. It doesn't always work the way you want it to, but it's better than the alternative. Rex looked at her. Is that something you know from experience? She glanced at him sideways with the ghost of an expression that in another year or two would probably become something she let reach her face fully. I'm here, aren't I? He looked at his wrench. Yeah, he said. You are. The differential rebuild took another hour. When they were done, Haley cleaned her tools and rolled them back into the canvas sleeve and set it on the corner of the workbench. Not in her bag, on the workbench. Rex noticed but said nothing. When she left, the tool roll stayed. It was still there the following week when she called from her lunch break. It was still there the week after that, and the week after that, taking on the particular quality of a thing that belongs somewhere settled and unremarkable, simply where it was supposed to be. Rex looked at it every morning when he opened the shop. It was, he thought, the most ordinary kind of evidence that something was changing. He put the coffee on and opened the bay door and let the Nevada morning in, and the tool roll sat on the corner of the workbench like a small flag planted in territory that was slowly becoming shared. I didn't make a ceremony of noticing it. He just noticed it and put his coffee down and went to work. 6 months after the night in Millstone, Conrad Hargrove was indicted on 7 counts in 2 counties, including financial fraud, 2 counts of criminal negligence, and 1 count that Rex did not read in detail, but understood was the one that had been most difficult to make stick, and the most important to the investigators who had been trying for 14 months. Ruth Briggs called him on the morning the indictment was announced. She said Lily had been told by her counselor in a way the counselor had determined was appropriate, that Lily had sat quietly for a while and then said she wanted to do something to celebrate. They had gone to a diner, not Millstone, a different one closer to Reno, with a sign in the window. Ruth had made sure of the sign in advance. Lily had ordered hot chocolate with marshmallows. She had told Ruth that she wanted to send something to Mr. Dalton. Ruth called Rex because she didn't have his address and needed to know where to send it. I gave her the shop. The package came 4 days later. A small flat envelope with a drawing inside folded once to fit. A new one made with better crayons than the original, the lines more confident. The diner again, the rain. But this time the perspective had shifted slightly. This time you could see inside the window the warm light of the interior, the small figures at the table. And through the glass, you could see the large figure that Lily had always drawn the same way, steady and present, solid as a building. But in this one, the large figure was not alone at the table. There were 2 small figures beside him now. On the back of the drawing in careful 8-year-old print for Mr. Rex, who stayed. Thank you for the door. Rex sat in the shop for a long time with the drawing in his hands. I thought about a woman who had written a letter in November. I thought about a child who had walked into a lit room. I thought about a daughter who had driven from Sacramento and sat on a workbench stool and asked to see the timing chain. I thought about what it meant to be a door, not the one who fixed everything, not the one who fought the battles in the dramatic way that battles got fought in stories, but the one who held still long enough for the truth to arrive, who made a room safe enough for a frightened person to speak, who stayed when staying was the harder choice. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he put it on the wall above his workbench beside the first one. 2 drawings, the same diner, the same rain, the same large figure drawn by the same hand, seen from 2 different nights, with 2 different amounts of fear and 2 different amounts of hope. Rex looked at them both. He picked up his wrench. I went back to work. The shop door stayed open. The sign in the diner window stayed up. And somewhere in Nevada, a girl named Lily Briggs was learning slowly and carefully in a Reno house with blue shutters and a yard that caught the afternoon light, that the people who love you leave doors in unexpected places. You'd just have to be brave enough to walk through. The week after the indictment was announced, Millstone Diner became briefly famous. Not in the way of television news trucks and reporters, though there were some of those. In the quieter way of things that spread through a community, because the community has decided the story belongs to it. People who had been in the diner that night told it to people who hadn't, and those people told it further. And the shape it took in the telling was not about the biker or the criminal or the dramatic confrontation, but about the smaller things, about a sign in a window, about a child who knew what the sign meant, about a room full of ordinary people who made a collective decision about what they were going to do. Donna Weaver was interviewed by 2 journalists and declined both times. She was, Rex thought, when he heard this, exactly the right person to have been behind that counter. I went back to Millstone twice in the 6 months that followed, not to revisit anything or to revisit himself in the mirror of the place, but because the pie had been genuinely good and the coffee was strong, and Donna was the kind of company that didn't require you to perform anything. The second time he went, she put a new sign in the window while he watched. Handwritten, laminated by the office supply store 2 doors down, replacing the one that had gotten worn and coffee splashed and slightly famous. If you feel unsafe, you can ask for help here. The same words, the same laminated card, the same corner of the window. Rex looked at it. You should get a better frame for that, he said. Donna looked at him over the counter. It works fine the way it is. I didn't argue. The Iron Wolves had a presence at the Henderson chapter that was different after Millstone. Not loudly different, not in a way that was discussed or declared, but in the way that communities change when something important happens inside them. A quiet recalibration of what they were for and what they were capable of. Breckett, who had driven the evidence to the county lockup, became the chapter's informal contact for situations where someone needed a room to be safe and didn't know where to find one. Not officially, not with any structure or program around it. Just as the person who would answer if a certain kind of call came in the call that started with a child's voice or an elderly person's voice, the voice of someone who had run out of options and was trying the last one. He got 3 such calls in the first 4 months. He handled 2 of them exactly right. The third one taught him something he told Rex about over coffee in Reno in November. Something about when to call in official channels immediately rather than trying to manage the situation. First, a lesson Rex had already learned but appreciated hearing stated. They were building something. Not intentionally, not with a name or a charter or a stated purpose. Just by doing the thing repeatedly because it was the right thing, which was how most enduring things got built. Rex and Haley found their way back toward each other slowly, not in a straight line. There were weeks of silence between her visits and visits that ended with one or both of them saying something that landed wrong and required time to absorb. There was a conversation in December that opened up 6 years of accumulated weight. His silence from prison and her silence after. And they sat in the shop with the heater running in the dark early outside and said things to each other that neither of them had said before. Things that were not comfortable, but were true and necessary and came out the other side of it still in the room together. She drove up from Sacramento one Saturday in January and brought lunch, and they ate it at the workbench without talking much. Just the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had decided to try. In February, she told him she was a mechanic. He had not known this. She had been in automotive technology for 3 years and was working at a shop in Sacramento, and had been for 2 years, and had not told him any of this when she came the first time in October, because she had not been ready to show him something she cared about. Rex looked at her across the workbench. You want to see the transmission rebuild I've been putting off, he said. She got her jacket. They worked on it together for 4 hours, talking in the intermittent, focused way that work makes possible, the conversation organized around the task rather than around itself, which meant you could say things and then move on without the weight of the saying staying in the air. She was good, better than good. She had a technical instinct that was different from his, more systematic and less intuitive, and they figured out together that the combination of the 2 approaches produced something better than either alone. When she left that evening, she said she would come back in 2 weeks. She did. Lily's counselor sent Rex a brief note in March, 3 lines, professional and careful, saying that Lily had spoken in a session about the night in Millstone, and that the counselor wanted Rex to know that Lily described it as the night she learned that asking for help was something that worked. Rex read the note twice. He put it in the drawer with Haley's first letter back from Sacramento, the one that had arrived 3 weeks after he mailed his letter in November. 4 careful sentences that said she had read what he wrote and she needed some time, and she would be in touch. I kept that drawer closed most days. But on the days when the accumulated weight of 6 years and what they had taken was heavier than usual, he opened it and looked at what was in it. A girl in Sacramento who was coming back. A child in Reno who had learned to ask for help. 2 drawings on a shop wall. A sign in a diner window. These were the things the past year had given him, and he was old enough and had been through enough to understand that the exchange was not fair. That nothing about the 6 years in a cage was fair, that justice did not balance accounts in the ledger way that people sometimes imagined. But he also understood that what he had now was real. The shop in the morning, the Nevada sky, his daughter's voice on the phone every few days getting easier, getting more itself, becoming the voice of the person she was rather than the voice of the cautious person she had learned to be. Slade stopped by on a Tuesday in April, as he often did, for coffee and the particular kind of conversation that old friendship made possible, where you could say something half-formed and be understood. They sat outside the shop in the morning sun, the Nevada air still sharp with the memory of winter, but warming toward noon. You seem different, Slade said. Different how? Less like you're waiting for something. Rex thought about that. I found the thing I was waiting for, he said. Or it found me. He paused. And then I found the other thing I'd been avoiding. Slade looked at him. Haley. Haley, how is she? Complicated, Rex said. Honest, getting better. Slade nodded. He drank his coffee. She's got your eyes, he said. I saw her pull in last month. I didn't introduce myself. Didn't think it was the right time. It'll be the right time eventually, Rex said. She'll decide when. Slade nodded again. They sat in the morning sun, and the April wind moved through the lot, and the shop smelled of metal and oil and the particular productivity of a place where work was being done correctly, and it was, Rex thought, exactly what he had imagined when he sat in a cell and tried to imagine the future in terms concrete enough to want. I had not imagined Millstone Diner. I had not imagined Lily Briggs in the last booth with the lightning bolt backpack. He had not imagined Carla Vance's voice on a 22-minute recording, speaking from October into January and the months after, still protecting her daughter. He had not imagined that stopping for coffee at 11:52 on a rainy Nevada night would be the thing that pulled several threads of his life back into a shape that had been lost for years. But perhaps that was the nature of doors. You couldn't build them in advance, and you couldn't predict where they appeared. You could only be the kind of person who recognized one when you came to it and had the courage to stop and go in and stay. He had learned to be that kind of person from the things that had tried to make him less. I thought about a woman who had written a letter in November, and a daughter who had been left the map to a man she had never met. I thought about his own daughter driving from Sacramento, with her hands on the wheel, pulling over twice, deciding to come anyway. I thought about trust that survives the distance, about love that plans for its own worst possibility, about the way people leave the things that matter to them in the care of those they've quietly decided are worth the trust. I thought about the drawing on the wall, two figures in the rain, the door behind them lit from inside. I was not the hero of the story. He had never believed in heroes in the comic book sense, the single bright figure who resolves everything by virtue of their excellence. I was a man who had stopped when stopping mattered, who had stayed when staying was the harder choice, who had kept his hands flat on the table so a frightened child could decide for herself whether he was safe. That was what he had been. That was what he intended for whatever years remained to keep being. The morning went on in the ordinary way. Slade left. A customer came in about a brake job. The radio played something old and familiar from a decade Rex was old enough to remember correctly. And in the shop in Reno, above a battered workbench in the morning light, two drawings by the same child's hand showed the same diner in the rain from two different nights with two different arrangements of hope. Rex Dalton looked at them before he started work the way he had started doing in the months since they arrived, not with ceremony or sentiment, but with the attention of a man who had learned to take note of the things worth noting. Then he picked up his wrench and went back to the work that was always waiting.